We just got back from spending 10 days in the US after a year and a half of living in Portugal. And in this video, we're sharing the 7 biggest reverse culture shocks we experienced.
Yeah, it's sort of funny. The things that seemed very normal when we lived there, now that we live in Portugal, some of these things just feel really out of sync.
Quick backstory if you're new here, we moved to Portugal in October of 2023. This was my first trip back to New York City and Connecticut, where we lived before we moved.
Yeah, we went back to California about 6 months after we moved, but now that we've been here a year and a half, and it's been more than a year since we've been in the US, it really seemed quite different.
Now, before we get into the culture shocks, we just want to start by saying that it didn't actually feel like much of a culture shock at all when we got there, at least not initially.
Yeah, it was almost like a time machine. We arrived at our property that we own in Connecticut, which is an Airbnb, and honestly, it was just like walking back into our home. It was really the oddest sensation.
Yeah, absolutely. We walked in and put our suitcases down. Matt turned on the masters and I went upstairs and curled up on the couch and watched Magnolia Network. And for an afternoon, it felt like the last year and a half never happened. It was just another chilly early spring afternoon in New England.
But after we settled in, well, that's when the culture shocks really began.
Now, the biggest culture shock, hands down, was consumerism.
Well, honestly, you turn on the television and it was astonishing the number of medical ads, prescriptions and treatments and side effects, just ad after ad after ad. It was stunning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't just television, just driving up the road, the amount of billboards and signs that were just kind of screaming at you. The area of Connecticut where we were, there are a handful of personal injury attorneys, and they just seem to battle it out on the billboards, like who can have the brightest colors and the biggest fonts and the most outrageous claims. And it just felt like not just that, but just all of the signs everywhere. It was just it really did feel like we were being bombarded with messages compared to our life here on the Silver Coast of Portugal.
And it was really just constant noise, and the volume was very high, right? It just sort of seemed like on television, the ads, they were just yelling at you about kids' toys or about restaurants or about this gadget or that gadget.
Yeah, at one point I just said, why is everybody yelling? And which was quite a thing for me to say because I'm a loud person. But I started to understand why so many Europeans say that Americans are just loud.
Well, the overwhelming consumerism, actually, we didn't get pulled into it. So maybe it's because we had international flights to take, but we avoided all of it with the exception of buying a few small items that are difficult to get here in Portugal.
Yeah, I think that was a really big thing because I think that when we lived in the US, it felt like we made 100, trips to Target a month. I'm sure that's not true. It felt that way. And we were back there this time and Matt said, do you want to go to Target? And I was like, I really don't. And so I feel like our own relationship with consumerism has changed quite a bit in the last year and a half that we've been here in Portugal.
Now, we did go to Home Depot a few times because we were working on the landscape in the back of the house. And so, plants and soil and things like that. But that was really I'd say our primary spend was at Home Depot.
And Home Goods, because that's just Mecca. Now, another big reverse culture shift that we recognized was just mindset. Now, a little bit of backstory here is that one of the reasons we went to Connecticut is to consider whether or not it was time to sell our short-term rental. We have some laws in the area that have recently changed. There's more competition, and it was really part of our trip to go and determine if this was going to be the right time for us to sell. We decided it wasn't, but that was one of the reasons we were there.
So when we were meeting with our property managers who oversee our property there, one of the first questions they asked was, well, have you thought about expanding?
And my first thought was, man, I have missed America. Just sort of like that expansion mindset. And that was my first reaction. But after we were there a little bit, especially in New York City, where we lived for almost a decade, it was just so glaring how much that mindset is everywhere. And I understand that New York City is different than a lot of other places in the US, but everywhere you went, from graffiti to high-end stores, the marketing messages were, you can have it all, and the dream is free, but the hustle is sold separately with dollar signs all around it. And so it is just a very different mindset than what we've experienced here in Portugal for sure. And again, it just showed how much we changed, because we used to absolutely thrive in that environment. And going through New York and seeing those messages everywhere, I think my feeling was more like, I love the city, but man, it is exhausting.
So crime was one of the other big differences that we noticed, one of the other shocks. In just the 10 days that we were in the United States, we were aware of 2 school shootings that happened during that time.
Yeah, one of the shootings while we were there was at Florida State University, and I saw an interview with a young man who was a student there who had also been a student at Parkland High School when there was a shooting there, and it was just tragic. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is where we are now, that people are not only experiencing school shootings but multiple. We don't need to really get into that, but it is tragic. And I think that the thing that was shocking to me maybe was I realized how sensationalized crime is in the reporting. I remember watching, it was, national news, local news, and I felt like the reporter had that same vibe of somebody in high school who has like really juicy gossip that they can't wait to share. And I just felt like crime is so sensationalized and almost glamorized. That was my take on it anyway.
Yeah. Well, and look, and Portugal certainly does have some crime. It's a lot less crime, don't get me wrong, a lot less crime in the United States, but it does certainly have some crime. But it doesn't feel like it's sensationalized in the same way that it is in the States, not only in the news reporting, but TV shows and movies and all these other things where crime and criminals are, to a large degree, they can be glorified in some of these shows. You just don't see that nearly as much here in Portugal.
Now, you and I see this a little bit differently, because you do enjoy a good crime show more than I do, but I think you even sensed it, didn't you?
Oh, I did. And frankly, the crime shows I like are these ones that take place in like Norway or something like that. But it was, it is very, very different.
Yeah. So the prices were absolutely, for most things, not surprising. It was shocking. Everything from groceries to restaurants to like personal items. I don't know if it was that high when we left. I feel like maybe it's gone up even since we left. And listen, prices have gone up here in Portugal too, but the difference was really shocking.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, here's an example. So we went out for a cocktail in New York City. Now I get New York City is expensive anyway, but we went out for a cocktail in New York City. The 2 of us having one cocktail, for the same amount of money that we spent on those 2 cocktails, we could have bought 8.5 full bottles of our favorite wine here in Portugal. And it's good wine, right? So that's just a sense of the differences in cost.
Yeah, I think it really made us realize how much harder it is to get ahead. Listen, not everybody needs to go out and pay for cocktails in New York City. I get that. But even regular items are expensive. And it feels like we get ahead so much farther, so much faster here than we did in the U.S. And, there's a lot of different choices that you can make around that, obviously. But the price difference was really shocking. But it wasn't everything, right? Some things were cheaper.
Yeah, it wasn't everything. I mean, probably the most glaring example of the other way was the fact that gasoline in Connecticut, when we had our rental car, was $2.99 a gallon, which is about 1/3 the cost of gasoline here in Portugal.
Which is why we chose a walkable city.
That is exactly right.
Tipping culture also felt very different. Now, let me say before we get too far into this that we are in no way against tipping. We are happy to tip for good service. We're happy to tip for mediocre service. One of us is. But the tipping culture that we experienced when we were back in the U.S. has become much more aggressive.
Well, it's not just the tipping, it's actually sort of the entitlement around it. It seems like 20% is now the bare minimum tip that's acceptable, and it's expected even when you walk up to a counter and order coffee and they spin the little iPad around. It was just so glaring.
Yeah, I'll give you one example, and that is that we went into a salad shop in New York York City, and it was a self-serve kiosk, so we ordered from the kiosk. And the salad itself wasn't even assembled by humans. It had all been automated, so it's like this assembly line where they just kind of dump the different ingredients in. And so we ordered from the kiosk, and the minimum tip was still 20%, even though there were no actual humans involved in the making of that salad, just to kind of show you some of the stuff that we encountered that Matt did not like. He was not pleased.
I guess the little robot making salad machine needed some oil or something.
Somebody needs to fill those ingredients. So, yeah. So maybe this is because we were in the Northeast in mid-April, so the trees hadn't really started blooming yet. But I was really surprised after living here in Portugal for a year and a half how brown everything was.
Yeah, in New York, I was sorry, in Connecticut. Yeah, I agree. Because here in Portugal, where we live on the Silver Coast, it is lush and green all year round.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love New England. I really do. But I had forgotten how completely bleak it is in the winter. And I remember thinking, no wonder I was always depressed in winter. We did hit a few of our favorite places in the U.S., not all of them healthy, but we did eat a lot of healthy meals as well, like salads and stuff, and both of us felt sick all week.
Yeah, it really actually hit us kind of hard, and even when we were eating things that were supposed to be healthy, I don't know how to say this politely, digestively it was a rough week.
Now, I don't know if that's pesticides, preservatives, other ingredients. I don't know what caused that, but really both of us felt like the food affected us very differently in the U.S. than it does in Portugal.
Yeah, and when we got back to Portugal, it didn't take very long for us to feel back to normal again.
Yeah.
Well, overall, it was a meaningful trip. I mean, we love seeing our friends, we love seeing our family, we love the United States, but it really confirmed for us how much Portugal has become home for us.
And if you're thinking about making a move to Portugal, we have a Moving to Portugal online course that offers a step-by-step guide to save you time and money, covers things like visas, healthcare, costs, budgets, all of that. And we'll leave a link in the description below if you want to check that out.
Well, so those are the 7 culture shocks that we experienced going back to the United States. If you think we missed any, please add them in the comments below. And make sure you like and subscribe to this video. And if you want to know more about the costs of living in Portugal, watch this video here.